Welcome, everyone. Dr. Anthony Criniti IV here, also known as Dr. Finance. This is the Dr. Finance Live podcast. We have an amazing guest today, Steve Sims, and we're going to learn a lot about him. He's a master player, a key connector, and so many other things, an author, entrepreneur. So we got a lot to learn. We had Steve on our Clubhouse the other day and really did a really big, great room, resonated with the audience. So let's give a warm welcome for Steve. Welcome, Steve. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me this morning.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you being here, sir. So let's start out trying to learn a little bit about yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
I think it's the same as every other entrepreneur. I came from, I suppose the word we call it now is humble beginnings, but I left school at the age of 15, went on the building site with my dad, and just had this feeling that I was destined for something else. I was due to do something more. Along the way, I thought to myself, I need to have conversations with successful people. Now, of course, today, we can do that by launching a podcast. We can do it by listening to a podcast. But back in the 80s and the 90s, I didn't have that luxury. So I used to go out and try and strike up conversations with who I thought at the time was the richest people in our town, our village, in the bar, in the restaurant. And I just grew because I grew with curiosity, dissatisfaction, I won't say resentment, but maybe a little bit of begrudgement that I didn't have the opportunities that what it looked like other people did. Along the way, me getting into rooms with affluent people would go, "Oh, do you know how to do this?" I'd be like, "Yeah, leave it with me." And I'd go and find a way of doing it. So I only wanted to have conversations with rich people, but the byproduct was that I launched the most successful experiential concierge for 23 years before we moved on. And we were responsible for everything from sending people down to the Titanic, having them walk the red carpet at every major award show you can think of, front row of like the Paris Fashion Week, through to things like getting people married in the Vatican by the Pope, going down to see the Titanic, singing on stage with our favorite rock band, closing down a museum in Florence for a dinner party of 6, and then having Andrea Bocelli come in and serenade him during that pasta. So we got this moniker of the real life Wizard of Oz, the man that can. There's so many titles I was given. One of the ones I liked was the Make-A-Wish Foundation for people with really big checkbooks. So that one made me giggle. But
I like it.
I just became the guy that could do all of these things, but it was never what I was doing that was kind of important to me. It was the result I got that would make you compelled to spend an hour talking to me and telling me why you just happen to be one of the richest people in the planet. So it was a journey. It was a Trojan horse to get that education, which, I put in Bluefishing, The Art of Making Things Happen, the book, and is what I coach and train and teach people now.
Thank you, Steve. To understand how you became successful, I want to journey back to Steve Sims's childhood. Can you tell us about where you grew up in the city and just try to describe that environment for us so we can see your progression, and we'll work through to get to present moment.
So it's very easy to cast your childhood as one of these dark, dismal days of like everything's black and white. There's no such thing as color. No one has TVs. And for you to go, "Oh my God, you had a terrible childhood." We didn't know any different. So, you talk to your kids like any parent out there. They talk to their kids about what they used to get up to and how, the TV at 12 o'clock at night would turn off because there was no other channels. And, the TVs were black and white, blah, blah, blah. And the kids go, "Oh my God, how did you live in such catastrophe?" But we didn't know it was any different. So I grew up, with the family, didn't go out much. I remember, and this was kind of funny, when I was a young lad, like 16 years old, my mum, I don't even know what it was. Maybe it was a pizza, maybe it was Chinese, but we got a takeaway. Okay. Mm-hmm. First time ever we got a takeaway. And mum would be like, "Oh, that's what rich people do. They get food delivered. we're not like them. And then one day we got food delivered and it was like, oh my God, it's like the Queen turned up. But it was those times, it was those days. I remember as I grew up, I thought to myself, I'm very poor. And as I say, I was a little bit disgruntled about that. But as I got older, and thankfully not too old, I was in my 20s when I realized I wasn't poor. I was just financially restricted. You know, I was always loved. I was always protected. The lights always went on when I flicked a switch. The water always came out of the taps when I turned them. I was always fed. I was always loved. So it was just a financial aspect that restricted me that I then decided, okay, if I've got all of that, and like we were talking earlier, I knew what it was like to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work. I knew what it was like to come home at 9 o'clock at night, you know, all wet and dirty from the building site. So I knew what hard work was like. So without realizing it, I was actually getting the best education in the planet.
Yeah.
Because I realized just one thing was missing: money. I had the grit, I had the work ethic. I would get, of course you bitch about it when you're getting up that early in the morning, but hey, you do it. And you learn you have to do what you have to do to get what you want. So I can't paint it as a poor picture. I can't paint it as just out of whack and black and white, and we were mugging people at night. But it was a rough little neighborhood of working class people where quite simply you didn't go out at 10 o'clock at night because you didn't know what trouble you were going to get into. But that was just the days then, you know? So that's what it is. Here's the funny thing. It was a shitty area that I lived in. Fast forward now,
Where was that, Steve? Was that London?
Yeah, East London.
East London.
And it was full of warehouses. So of course the warehouses would go quiet at like 8 o'clock at night. So that's where people would like hang around and do stupid shit, you know, later on in the evening. The funny thing is, this was a rough area because it was where all the warehouses for print presses and mechanics and workshops were. But now all of those people have moved on, and all those bloody warehouses are converted trendy lofts now. So this shitty area of London that I lived in is now some pompous multi-million-dollar, you know, one-bedroom apartment kind of gig. It's funny to see it transition.
We got the same thing here, Steve, in Philadelphia. Same thing. I lived in the hood in South Philly, and now everybody wants to come and get a house for $500,000. Go figure.
It's the world, isn't it?
So, Steve, that's awesome. So, fast forward. Okay, so you get to your 20s. At some point, you realized, all right, well, no big deal. I'm financially restricted. Everything else is good. Let me grab the wheel. So, at what point did you start grabbing the wheel, and which direction did you decide to turn it to start going into the right area?
So I knew I could work, but I knew I wasn't making money. Something's missing. Don't know what it is. So I went out to have those kind of conversations. And I didn't know about starting a business. I literally wanted to change the room I was in. I was in a pub. Everyone else in the pub was broke. So I knew straight away, for me to be anything other than what I was, I needed to change my environment. So again, today, we can do it by listening to a podcast, reading a book, joining a Facebook community, going to a seminar, a webinar. We're inundated with opportunities. In fact, the excuse that you can't change your room today is bullshit. You can change your circle of influence and challenge by subscribing to the right podcast, okay? We didn't have it then. So I started to try and find out, okay, I'm in a shitty pub. Where do rich people go and drink? All right, I'm going to start going there. Now, it's funny because I would have enough money for like 2.5 beers in a night. And now I'm in this other place with only enough money for like one imported beer. I remember, and it's funny, especially now that I live in Los Angeles, the fancy beer was Corona because it was imported from this mystical, faraway dreamland. Now, let's be honest, is the cheap beer that you can like swig on an afternoon or wash your car with. But at the time, this was like, oh, this is the imported luxury beer, Corona. Here's a little bit of lime on the top. Because at the time, we were just being poured a pint of Guinness. But I wanted to watch how people have interacted. and I wanted to get in those conversations. Now, of course, I was very bad at the beginning. I got better. I started to ask the right kind of questions, and I started to get into conversations with people. What are you working on? Why is that impactful for you? And one thing that my wife actually brought my attention to is that I've always been curious. How do I make my motorcycle go faster? How do people talk to each other when they're billionaires? How do people always get into a nightclub without a reservation? How do you always make sure you get the best table in the restaurant? I was always curious. And when you're curious, you don't think about anything else. You don't think about doubt. You don't think about possibility. You just, how did this happen? You're curious and you're fully engaged. And my wife said, basically, as I've got older, and I'm 55 now, and the last time she said it was probably about 6 months ago, she said, I'm a 55-year-old, 5-year-old. I'm just always curious. And I think that's a skill that a lot of people don't have today. And it is a skill, it is a trait. But if you can train yourself to be curious, yeah, you'll pull the back off of a TV and not be able to put it back together again. But at least you'll know what the back of a TV looks like. So, it was all those kind of things. I was always very curious. And I think it was that curiosity that actually propelled me to discover great things.
That's great, Steve. So you actually eventually you led to creating this company called Bluefish. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. It was. Yep.
Okay. And this all happened from, you had a nightclub scene that really transcended into that, right? Where
you're being polite. I was the doorman of a shady nightclub. And we had a mixture of dubious individuals coming in and people coming in from the offices. And I remember at the time, my idea of wealth was to be able to go to the office during the day wearing a nice suit and a watch and not being on a building site. So, it was that kind of stuff. And these people were probably making, I don't know, 150, 200 grand a year, which, don't let me get arrogant. That's nice. But you ain't retiring. And I remember I would see these people and I'd be like, oh my God, that person's so wealthy. Just because that's what I believed. So in the early stages, it was hanging around with people and I would get, because I was the doorman, I knew where all the nightclubs were. And I knew what nights were having celebrity nights. So before Google came along, I was the Google of the nightlife. I could walk up to people and I'd go, hey, Bobby, do you want to go and hang out with XYZ singer on Thursday? And they'd be like, oh, really? And I'd be like, yeah, I know where she's going to be. A couple of $100 and I'll make sure you can go. And that's how it started. And then they would go, they would really enjoy it. And then I'd go, so Bobby, I'll keep you posted about what else is going on. They'd be like, yeah, great, Steve. And I'd be like, by the way, Bob, what does he do, Bobby? And I would start these conversations because I had their attention. And I think that's what people avoid today. They don't know how to get people's attention. And you get people's attention by first solving a problem they have. So, that's what I did. I was solving their nightlife woes. And then I was throwing my own parties. And then people were like, oh, you're really good at throwing parties. Will you throw one for the launch of my new car or my new jewelry line or the premiere of a movie? I literally went from throwing nightclub parties to ending up working with the Grammys and the Kentucky Derby and the New York Fashion Week and Sir Elton John's Oscar party. I just kept going.
How long did that take, Steve, to get from that point to that point?
It's very hard to say because for the first 7 years, I ignored the fact I had a business. Every year I would say to Claire, oh, yeah, I'm making some great connections. I'll be getting a job with one of them soon. Now, I always charged people. I noticed that if I gave, and you can use this test, if I gave you a couple of free tickets and I said, oh, that concert tomorrow night, I can't make it. Do you want the tickets? You may go, oh, thank you very much. You take the tickets. 2 days later, I'll go, hey, did you like the concert? You may turn around and go, oh, do you know something came up and couldn't make it? And I'm thinking, I spent money on those tickets. I gave you those tickets, but they were only of value to me because I spent money on them. The value to you was zero because you were not engaged in them.
Mhm.
Okay. You had no commitment value. So to you, they were worthless. So as soon as a barbecue came up with your buddy, you know, that became more valuable than a couple of tickets, which to you had a face value of squat. So what I started doing was if I had a couple of tickets, I'd be like, hey, that's $200. Here's the thing. You owe me $200 unless you go, and they'd be like, oh, okay, great. Now you'll go because you don't want to be paying me the $200.
That's a good trick. I like that.
So that's what I started doing. But I would charge people for absolutely everything. And then I remember saying to my wife one day, hey, don't worry about it. I'm making some good connection. This is like 7 years into me running this kind of connection thing. And she looked at me like I was stupid, which, pretty much most of my life I have been. And she went, you have a business, don't you? Now, bear in mind, we had a nice apartment. She had a nice car. I had a nice motorbike. We were living well. We were flying around the world doing all of these parties, like the Monaco Grand Prix, the Cannes Film Festival. So we were living a good life. But she said to me, you've been doing this for 7 years and you haven't realized you've got a business. I was like, oh. So it was then that I screwed it up. See, it's what entrepreneurs do. As soon as it starts working, we find a way to fudge it up and make things go wrong. And as soon as I realized, hang on a minute, I have clients, I have reputation, I have access, I have a network. Wow. Okay, I better start taking this seriously. It killed part of the mojo. Okay. And it probably took me about 3 years to get back to that. Hang on a minute. You tried taking it seriously, forget about that. Get Claire to handle all of that. You just go back to being the moron that flies the planet pulling shit off. And so I did. So I think the first 10 years was a bit of a helter-skelter in not knowing what I was doing, not realizing what I had, and then almost with focus screwing it up. So once I got over that, I think it took me probably about 5 years taking it seriously to start getting into those gigs. And I think my first big gig was the New York Fashion Week. Then it was Naris that owns the Grammys. Then it was the Kentucky Derby. It was the New York Fashion Week for a few years. Cavallino Classic. I ended up working with Ferrari. And so it just kind of took off. So it's one of these things like for 3 or 4 years, you're nibbling, trying to get into that league. And then I remember in 2004, I was the official concierge to the Grammys, the New York Fashion Week, and the Kentucky Derby. Okay. I only basically needed the Super Bowl to have basically hit all 4 of the largest events in the planet of that month or of that quarter. So it was kind of, and then it just took off from there. So, it's the usual kind of thing, 10 years to be an overnight success.
All right. Thank you, Steve. I want to step back for a second, though, because I know you were a bricklayer. Is that right? At some point?
Yep,
Okay.
I was.
And where did that fit into this whole picture? Was that before the doorman thing? And
yeah,
can
it
you
was.
describe that job?
And it was kind of weird because my dad was a bricklayer and my whole family was bricklayers. And I wanted more for myself. So when I ended up becoming a doorman, I was very upset with myself because a bricklayer, an electrician, a plumber, these are skilled professions.
Yeah.
Okay. These are noble, skilled professions.
Mm-hmm.
And there I was as a doorman, which, sorry guys, it ain't a skilled profession. You slap someone, 9 times out of 10 they're drunk, so they're kind of doing this and they can't even get you. So it ain't a skilled profession. But I was on the building site and I wanted something more. And I remember one day I went to the top of the scaffolding and I had a what they call a hod of bricks, and I was carrying some bricks for the bricklayers up the scaffolding. And as I got to the top of the ladder, next to me at the top of the ladder was my dad. And, it's not unusual in itself. But next to him was my uncle, who's a bit younger than him. Then my cousins, who were like late teens and mid-20s. And then next to them, my granddad, who was just knocking on 80, 78, something like that. And I thought, shit, there's my lifeline, you know, through my cousins, then my uncle, then my dad, then my this is every generation of my life. Here, I'm actually seeing into the future, and I didn't like it. So tea break time came up, and I went running into this tea hut. And my granddad was already in there. He's damp, he's old, he's, you know, not happy with his life, sitting in the corner, pouring some tea from his thermos flask to try and warm himself up. And I ran over to him like an idiot little kid. And I'm like, Granddad, did you ever think you'd be doing this when you were this old? Now, of course, that's a really borderline abusive, insulting question to ask, because no one wants to be doing it at that age. And he didn't even look at me. He just said, and I remember this till the day I die. He said, son, if you don't quit today, you'll be me tomorrow.
Wow.
And I thought, shit, that's true. Of course, as you get older, you look back and you go, oh, I was going to do that last year. And you realize that last year was 3 years ago. You know, time flies the older you get. So I quit that day and I went off to try and get jobs that would surround myself with affluent people. Yacht charters, jet charters, luxury car rentals, any job, insurance salesman, any job that would get me hanging around people with money, I went for. And I got fired from absolutely every single one of them. And that's when eventually, needing money, I ended up working on the door of a nightclub. But funny enough, like all entrepreneurs, it's usually those tough, dark chapters of our life that give us the greatest education. And I remember being on the door going, I can either be pissed off or I can benefit from this. How can I benefit from this? So I started playing psychological games with myself. I'd look at people and I would try to guess why they're going into the club. Is it a first date? Is it celebrating a contract? Is it a high school reunion? Any of these things. And I'd be like, hello, gents, what are we celebrating tonight? And they'd be like, oh, it's Jimmy's birthday. And I'd be like, oh, right, okay. So I actually started using the door to get better at human psychology, both in body language, ambience, body positioning. And you'd see a couple of guys that have already had a couple of beers in them and they just want to go in a fancy club and start trouble. Mm-hmm. And you'd recognize it from the body language. And so, you know, hey, boys, what are we celebrating tonight? No, nothing. Oh, that's great. Hey, you know, not being funny, lads, but tonight's really not the right night for you. Come out tomorrow night. Let's make it a good one. and I would protect the front door because nobody in the planet wants to be punching people inside. Nobody, you know, I didn't. So if I could protect my front door, I avoided 99% of the problems inside. So that's what I did.
Sounds like a clubhouse stage.
it suddenly became, I became really good at reading people. Mm-hmm. From that real, what I thought was a low point, gave me the chance to be able to read people. What are you saying versus what do you actually want, which are two different things. What I'm hearing and what you need, two different things. So I started picking up on all these things. And as I say, just used it as an education. I try to find a way of making my dark days benefit me.
Thank you, Steve. All right, Steve. So here's the plan. If you're okay with that, I have about 20 questions, figure about 1 to 2 minutes each. Will that work for you?
Let's go.
All right, brother. Thank you. All right. So first I want to plug some of your products, services, things that you offer and stuff like that. So let's start with, can you tell us about the Sims Distillery? I'm very curious about this special thing you got called the Sims Distillery.
I hate online courses and I did the stupid thing by producing one. So I built 16 programs or 16 chapters on how to communicate, how to leverage your relationships, how to build relationships. I built an entire course out of it and then realized this isn't me. This isn't my personality. So the information is still there, but I transferred it and translated it over into a community. So now what we do is 2 times a month, I'll get an expert come in and we'll do an AMA, Ask Me Anything. And we will interview an expert. I've had billionaires on there. I've had heads of organized crime. I've had heads of businesses. All these different people will come on. You get access to a private Facebook group when you become a member of Sims Distillery. You tell me what your problem is, and I go and find one of my friends that's an expert who comes in. We had a couple of days ago, we had the top ranked Google agency by Google actually come in to tell us about what's happening regarding cookies and pixels over the next 12 months and what you need to be aware of. So, we're constantly getting experts in. So Sims Distillery is the cheapest way for you to get into my community and have conversations with my people in a private Facebook group and be part of those expert AMAs on top of all the backlog of training, videos, and a whole library of stuff in there.
What's it take to be an expert on Sims Distillery?
You've got to bring value. You've got to know something that can help somebody else.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. All right. So next question, I want to talk about your books. How many books did you write and what are their names? And by the way, we're going to be co-writing a book together. I don't know if you know that, The 13 Steps to Riches with Eric Swanson. So,
Swanson. No, I didn't know. So I got offered, I was at a party, told a story. A week later, it turned out that the person I was telling the story to not owned, but was the head of a rather large company called Simon Schuster, largest publishing house in America. And they wanted me to write a book. So I did. And I never thought it would take off. I never thought it'd be big. Bluefishing, the art of making things happen. You can also get it on Audible. And I did it. And it took off. First couple of months was hysterically, painfully low. And then the third month, it just hockey sticked. And it's been a bestseller and translated into, I'll probably forget a few here, Mandarin Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese, Korean, Polish. And it just, I think 2 months ago, got released in Russian.
Wow.
And it's been a bestseller all over the place. So it's really humbling when you get letters from Poland going, oh, what you told about in this book, I've been able to implement it, because it's all basic, stupid, simple stuff. And for some reason, you've decided to ignore. If it can get me an audience with the Pope, maybe you shouldn't be ignoring it. So, it's done really, really well. So that's Bluefishing, the art of making things happen. It's the only book, but I am actually slowly, my God, if it ever happens, working on book number 2 now. That'll be a 2022 release.
And then the 13 Steps to Riches. You're going to be the master.
Swanson in there. Yeah, I did a segment in there for him.
That's an awesome book series, by the way. Don Green he's writing the, I believe the forward or the intro. I always get confused. Sharon Lechter also.
Sharon. Yeah, my girl loves Sharon.
Yep. So thank you, Steve. Okay, so get that book, book, folks. That's called Bluefishing. Bluefishing or Bluefish?
Bluefishing, the art of making things happen. You can find it on steveDsims.com. There's also the video on there of my book launch.
And next question, Steve, have you ever gone bluefishing?
No. The funny thing is, I didn't even know. The word bluefishing came from a Dr. Seuss, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, bluefish. Ah. So it was only, I just liked Dr. Seuss, so I just made it up. It was years later that someone said to me, you do know there is a bluefish? And I was like, is it really? And so, yeah, I had no idea there was actually a fish.
Wow. And then you named it that, I think you said something about your password at your club or something.
Yeah, I used to, like I said to you earlier, I would know where all the clubs were. So I would say, hey, go to this door, see Eric, tell him Sim sent you, and repeat this password. So I would give him these silly passwords. And one of the passwords was, finish this sentence, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish. So he would walk up to Eric and go, hey, Sim sent me bluefish. And the guy would be like, oh, in you go. And that'd be it. So it was literally only silly little passwords that I made up. But people liked them. And they were like, oh, you're that bluefish company, aren't you? And that's how it started.
Wow. I love it. That's a great story. All right, Steve, can you tell us about the top 3 private events that you put together for clients? So I'm looking to hear about your best
Top,
stories. I'm sure Elon Musk is on there, maybe Bocelli or.
well, there's certain stories I can't tell you about by certain people. So one of my most well known, because it was very public, or talked about afterwards, should I say, was I had a client that wanted to have a dinner party in Florence, Italy, and he wanted to make it spectacular. So I ended up taking over the Accademia di Galleria Museum, and we had it from like 6 o'clock in the evening, actually earlier, 5 o'clock in the evening, till 2 o'clock in the morning, the entire museum. And it's the famous museum that houses Michelangelo's David. So what we did was we had a table of 6 set up at the feet of Michelangelo's David.
That's
We had
incredible.
a string quartet. And then as they started eating their pasta, I had Andrea Bocelli come in to serenade them as their dinner time music. So that was one of the things that we did. We've had drum lessons by Guns N' Roses, guitar lessons by ZZ Top. As I say, we sent people down on the Titanic. We've had people in SpaceX with Elon Musk. So there's been quite a few stories of the stuff that we got up to.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you, Stephen. By the way, I think I said this at a clubhouse, but I used to live in Florence for 6 months back in college. And I lived few blocks from from the David. So I'm very familiar with the David, and I'm very familiar with how impossible that seems. And you made that possible because they, like you said, they have the signs "Do not eat or drink" everywhere in the place.
Yeah, that
so
was
for you
funny.
to pull that off, that's incredible.
Yeah, that was humorous. I remember as we had the 2 big, so as you know this, there's 2 massive great wooden doors at the front of the museum that only open up when art is going in. There's where the visitors come in, there's a side door into the building. We needed these 2 wooden doors to open up because we had pianos coming in and cooking utensils and platforms. So they opened up these doors, and on the doors inside are, God, I don't know, 15, 20 plaques, and they're in different languages. And so I'm just making chit chat with the guy that opened the door for me. And I didn't know what each one of these plaques said. So I said, oh, what do these say? You know, are these like patrons? Are these like donations? Are these like companies that support the museum? Because you get those kind of sponsor plaques, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And he turned around, he said, no, they say the exact same thing. And I said, what's that? He said, no food and drink in the museum. And as he's saying that, the guys are coming in with like cooking utensils and ovens and cookware. So it's funny that we were completely ignoring these plaques.
What was his expression when that happened?
Oh, he just smiled. The way he looked at it, you know, because all the catering staff was coming in and then followed by the piano. He just put a big smile on the fact that they all say the same thing as all the cookware was coming through.
That's hysterical. Thank you, Steve. That's a great story. All right. What are your thoughts on being called the real life Wizard of Oz? So you do have a lot of titles, as you mentioned.
Yeah, that one was by Forbes and Entrepreneur Magazine. I didn't like it. And the reason I didn't like it was because in the movie, The Wizard of Oz, the guy's a fake. You know, he hides behind a curtain and doesn't actually do anything, you know, except for talks through a crazy kind of microphone. So when they came out with it, a friend of mine phoned me up and they said, have you seen the newspaper? You know, and he'd obviously read the article. And he said, you're the real life Wizard of Oz. And I'm like, oh, shit, he was a fake. But I haven't heard anyone ever realize that. They've all gone, oh, you're the one that makes things happen. In the movie, he never did. So it's always been like this kind of, you're called something that gets people thinking with imagination, but don't look at it too deep because this guy was a fake. And so it's always kind of bothered me a little bit.
What name would you prefer if you can change it right now?
Steve.
Steve, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you a name. I actually I used to make people call me this back in the day. I was joking. I would say I'm the happen maker because I would make things happen, right?
Okay.
But you know, if you want to take it, you're more than welcome to trademark it, the happen maker. And you can say why? Because I make things happen.
All right. Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
when I become famous in a couple of years, you'll be like, that Dr. Finance, I got to take that name. All right. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. All right. So next question. We have met you have met many famous people like Elon Musk, Andrea Bocelli. Who are some people that you still will love to meet and possibly include in your private events? So, you're still doing this Bluefish thing.
Oh.
Who else you want to put on the list? Who else you want to see? I mean, this you can control your destiny at this point because you basically can get access to anybody.
So I left the concierge world probably about 3 years ago. A lot of people don't know this, but I did. Left it before COVID. I've been focusing on Sims Media and helping entrepreneurs get what they want. So that's been really working well for me. The daft thing is, if I had had a list 20 years ago of the people I wanted to have met, then I would have exceeded that list 4,000 times. So I never thought I'd be, sipping espressos with Andrea Bocelli. I never thought I'd be talking about, America with Madeleine Albright. I never thought that I'd be sitting around with Jean-Paul Dejouria talking about hair products. I never imagined those things. So would I like to put a list together? I don't know who would be on that list. But that being said, I love having conversations. So I'm always open to new conversations. And here's the daft thing. Everyone wants to meet Mark Cuban, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jean-Paul Dejouria. There may be someone in your high street that is really, really good at marketing that you don't know. You can learn a lot from. You can earn shitloads of information from Sharon Lechter. And a lot of people criminally don't even know who Sharon Lechter is. Okay. But they could learn an absolute ton from her. So don't be too starbound to actually try and look at who's in the news. Try to look at who's making impact.
That's beautiful, Steve. Yeah, and I remember you were talking about that in depth on Clubhouse, and I liked what you said, that not always the influencer, and this is kind of steps into my wheelhouse a little bit, it's the money guy or gal behind that influencer, the one in the shadows that no one doesn't know about. That's usually the one that's probably even cooler, I'm paraphrasing you, than the actual influencer himself. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. All right. So what role has networking played in your life? Maybe 1 to 2 minutes.
I don't like networking because networking makes people think that they go into a room, they run around the room, shake as many hands as they can, and grab as many business cards as they can. I like to have conversations. So whenever I go to a networking event, which is very, very rare, it's because there's 1 or maybe 2 people in that room that I am locked and loaded to have a conversation with. I've done my research. I know why I want to talk to them, and I go in just for them. I've gone to events before where those 2 people haven't turned up and I've left. So I'm not a great fan of networking events because everyone seems, desperate, gasping for the same air.
It's funny you say that, Steve. I noticed a lot of these masterminds, these great masterminds. I just joined up for this major mastermind. I don't want to mention the name, but as I'm sitting there and there's 100 people there, which I only thought there were going to be 40, I'm realizing I'm here to network, I guess, besides being here for the major, person that's on stage. What all these people, like, I'm not really here for them. But so what you just said, like, you show up at an event, you got all these other people here, but you're locked on one person. So what's the point of being around, 50 other people around here? When you have one person on your top of your mind.
The reason I don't, okay, yours is slightly different. So let's get accurate with this. Networking events are too vague. You could have a guy in there with a plumbing business. You could have a guy in there with a mechanical business. You can have a guy in there with a web business, and you may have nothing in common with any of these. So networking events are too vague. If it's a marketing mastermind event that you're going to,
or a major influencer,
at least now everyone has the same kind of desire and thought process. So now it's different to a networking event. Now you are in a mastermind with like-minded individuals who may be doing things different to you. So that's the way. So if you're in a mastermind event, that's completely different to being in a networking event. Networking, like your Better Business Bureau,
Oh, okay. I see.
Way too vague. But if you're going to a mastermind event, the good thing is, you know that everyone in there has paid good money to listen to some good speakers, to be in a room full of like-minded creative disruptors. That's a different framework. But even then, I'll be very, very evil. I will go around and I'll have a conversation with you. And if you bore me in the first 10 seconds, I'm on to the next person. I don't want your business card. I'm not going to say, let's do lunch. There's none of that bullshit. I'm just going to go, hey, great. Hey, have a good time. I'm gone. So I am very, very abrupt and aggressive to make sure I'm having a good conversation. Again, it's a conversation I want to have. I don't want your business card. I want to have a connection and a conversation.
I love it. That's perfect. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. And I'm actually 100% on the same page with you. All right. So how do you successfully network? Well, okay. Well, using the term network or whatever you want to call it, how do you successfully network? We're keeping it a loose terminology.
Yeah.
Elaborate on some of your tactics that you have used.
So I have a point. That's it for a start. Too many people walk into a room and it's the classic Nirvana. Here we are now, entertain us. No. When you go to any kind of event whatsoever, have a point, have a purpose. Are you trying to promote your service or are you trying to get help? So have a point and a purpose, and then go fishing to find someone who's got a solution. So whenever you walk into a room, don't do it by haphazard. Don't do it by just, happenstance. Walk in there with purpose.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. Okay. So the next question is, this is about entrepreneurs. I don't know about London, but here, I know you're actually in LA, but in the United States, the SBA has about, I think it's like a 95% fail rate on entrepreneurship within the first 5 to 10 years, something like that. Don't quote me on the statistics, but it's very high. So why do so many entrepreneurs fail to successfully make the right connections?
My light's just gone off. Fear. A lot of the time they're frightened. They're frightened of talking to successful people because they're intimidated. But then isn't it successful people that they need to be talking to? So a lot of people are actually frightened of doing it.
Thank you, Steve. All right. What is more important, who you know or what you know? Classic question. Who you know or what you know? What's more important?
I would say what you know. Because if what you know can answer someone else's problem, then you've just got to find the who that has that problem, and then you've got both. If you know someone, but you bring no value to the conversational relationship, it's going to be very short-lived.
That's awesome. Thank you, Steve. Okay, you're doing great here. What can one book change the world?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. See, I remember it was Ryan Long said to me that someone somewhere has had a problem and gained a solution that they've written in a book. So I did a podcast the other day where, quite simply, I just read a poem from Socrates. So, and it's more probably accurate today than it's ever been. So the bottom line of it is, yes, you've just got to find the right book.
I agree with you, Steve. Has any books on the same note? Has any books ever changed what you attribute to changing your life?
Oh yeah, loads of them. There's a ton of books that have done it. Everything from the Da Vinci Code that's taught me just to imagine to Ryan Long's Trust Me, I'm Lying, the manipulation of media. So I like to read and consume books.
Same here, Steve. Okay, Steve, we're going to pivot now. We're going into the financial area. Right before we do that, which is connected to finance, is mentoring important? And who are some of your mentors?
I would probably not like to say, but I have 3 coaches at different areas of my life. I think everyone today, for you to get to any level whatsoever, you need help. You cannot do it alone. And you also need to get there faster by finding people that have tried it before, failed, and then learned how to do it properly. So anyone could do anything if you have 500 years to do it, but we want to get it done in 12 months. So get a coach. So I have good mentors and I have good coaches.
And Steve, definitely, would you say it's applicable for people like us? Like in our youth, like we're both trailblazers. We had no connections, and correct me if I'm wrong, into the space we've entered now, and you're ahead of me in that regard. So I come from a real estate background too, and so do you. There was nothing in this space. Everything had to be trailblazed. I had to create my own path. I'm sure you too.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
the average person's like that, right? Would you say the average person has to get that mentor more than anybody because they really have nothing there for them?
Well, I'm an average person. I think we're all average persons. I don't think I'm an expert in absolutely anything. I think I'm just a very good student. So I believe anything that we can do good today, we can do better tomorrow. And if I can get better faster by having a mentor or a coach, then why would you not do that?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you, Steve. All right, Steve, financial questions. We just have a few of them, and then we'll proceed to the closing. What are your favorite financial books? Maybe 3.
Ooh, favorite financial.
I know you're Sharon Lechter's friend too, so.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, so I'm going to try to.
I know you're my friend too, right?
So, Pam Pryor did a really good book. I'll avoid Sharon because anything Sharon's done is absolutely brilliant in any case. So Sharon just needs a massive plug regardless.
Yeah.
Anything by Sharon Lechter. There you go. That's one. Pam Pryor did a book on outsourcing your CFO, which really did change my way of looking at what a CFO stood for. I will be clear and say that I am absolutely terrible with money. So any of the financial stuff, I've realized is a weakness. So the classic Dan Sullivan, Joe Polish, work on your strengths and delegate your weaknesses. My wife is the one that handles all of our finances. She's the one that gains the education. She's the one that handles all of that. So that question will probably be best asked to her.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. All right. And do we need money to survive?
Yeah. Anyone that says you don't is an idiot. You do. You just don't need millions. Getting millions is a byproduct of a successful mindset, but you can't have a successful mindset if you're living in a gutter and you're swimming in pain. So you do need a little bit of cash to be able to make sure you're stable and you're fed and you're healthy. And then you need a successful mindset to get to the big bucks.
Thank you, Steve. And by the way, I got to give you more credit than you gave yourself. I think you're on the right track to being a great finance student. Like the fact that you had answered that correctly, that question. That's one of my biggest things that I preach, especially in my last book, The Survival of the Richest. It sounds like common sense, Steve, and you're around billionaires, but it's not for the average person. The regular person on the street, they don't know. Like they think that, money just comes and goes and we can always, but money is essential to survival. You're correct. Thank you, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Is finance necessary for everyone? Why or why not?
Yeah, because every time I've gotten poor is because I mishandled my finances. Every time I've got into a relationship I didn't like, it's because I mishandled my finances and I focused on them as a paycheck. So I realized that the finances were actually changing my behavioral movements and my tone. So as soon as I took the money out of it and I delegated that to Claire, I could focus on the challenge as to whether or not I wanted to accept it. So finances are very important. They create a bellwether mentality in you that for me was very disruptive. So that's why I moved my way. But it's imperative to get your finances good so you've got stability to grow.
Right on. Thank you, Steve. 3 more questions. All right. So how important is having a purpose in business and what is your purpose? Actually,
My purpose is to get people to do things that they should be doing. And it's usually what terrifies you. I like creating impact. And I think that's it. I think we've got to have a purpose. The purpose can change over your time frame. Your goals will change. Your ambitions, your dreams will change. So will your purpose. But for me now, I want to create impact in the ability for us to be able to communicate, leverage relationships, and form strong relationships.
That's beautiful, Stevie. You know, in that last part you mentioned, most people come on my show, they don't mention that. That's a very important point. Your purpose does change as you get older. And we're walking through life cycles every day. You know, there's always something shifting us. Who knew COVID would happen a year and a half ago? You know, I don't know about you, but in my personal life, I experienced so much tragedy in the past year and a half. I mean, purpose is shifting. So that's a great point, Steve. Thank you, Steve. All right, 2 more questions left. What would you like to accomplish in the next 10 years or so, and why?
More impact. I think people are getting scared to communicate, and I want to see people communicating more. I want people to get out of their way of their own monsters and start achieving more. And that's all I want. I want people to stop being scared, stop worrying about other people's views and opinions, because they really don't matter, and start focusing on what you can do.
Thank you, Steve. That's awesome. Last question. What would you like to be your legacy to the world?
Maybe not the best answer, but you know I don't care. I really don't care what you say about me once I'm dead. I don't care what you say about me now. I focus on creating impact. And if I'm creating impact, then I'm doing what I want to do. When I'm gone, dead and buried, and I'm food for the worms, I really don't care.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Steve. But basically, you would like to be known for helping people and things like that, right?
No, I really don't care if I'm attributed with any of it. You know, I would like to think that people are living a more impactful, fulfilled life, and I've had some element of it. But if I get no credit, I'll be absolutely fine. I don't have an ego that cares about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. All right, Steve. So, well, I'd like to get maybe some last minute thoughts from you. If you have, if you want to close up, anything you want to say, I'll leave the floor to you. You're more than welcome to plug any books or anything you got, anything you got coming up. You know, totally your stage. So go ahead, Steve.
Well, if I resonate with you, go and subscribe to me on stevedsims.com or follow my life on Instagram at stevedsims. There's only one M in Sims, and don't forget the D in the middle. But outside of that, we've plugged everything I do, but I challenge you. Do something different. You know, play a different radio station, eat a different kind of food, drive a different way to work. Just do something different that gets your mind used to the fact that, okay, we're going to do things differently from now on. You'll be amazed at what you can achieve when you think like that.
Thank you, Steve. All right, Steve, I'm going to wrap it up, and then we'll close out. And if you can hang around for just a moment after that, I just want to chat with you for a bit. So, folks, thank you. This is Dr. Anthony Criniti IV, also known as Dr. Finance. You're on the Dr. Finance Live podcast, and our special guest, Steve Sims. So make sure you check out his book called Bluefishing, and also the 13 Steps to Riches. It hasn't been produced yet, but he's going to do what book, Steve? 5, I think.
I don't know. I have no idea what I'm in. Eric just tells me what I'm doing, and I'm there.
All right, one of those books. There's 13 books. We're on like book 3 now. So check that out. Also, Steve's website as well. Check out the drfinance.info. It's our website, and as well as subscribe to all of our social media, including Steve's. Steve, you're everywhere on social media, right? Facebook.
I am everywhere, all under Steve D. Sims.
That is awesome. So definitely do that. And don't forget, folks, check out this side. Everything's backwards on video. My 3 books, The Necessity of Finance. I always start with that first. I wrote that for my students, and then go to the most important lessons in economics and finance. And finally, if you want to get nightmares, my 500+ book, The Survival of the Richest. Read that 1 page at a time. Disclaimer. Okay. So thank you, folks. You've been watching the Dr. Finance Live podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you all. Bye-bye now.